Welcome to True Crime Case Files, the podcast that delves into the darkest corners of criminal history. Today, we step under the glass eyes of Texas to unravel the chilling murder of antique doll collector Annabeth Carlton in her own home. Join us as we piece together a tale of obsession, betrayal, and cold-blooded murder. In the quaint East Texas town of Kilgore, the summer of 1983 was marked by an unsettling stillness that would soon be shattered. Annabeth Carlton, age 61, a retired history teacher and an esteemed member of the Kilgore Historical Society, lived alone in a two-story Victorian house on Maple Street. Her residence, a veritable shrine to a bygone era, housed one of the largest collections of antique dolls in the state of Texas. The walls, lined with glass-eyed porcelain figures, bore silent witness to her solitary existence. Miss Carlton, a Kilgore College alumna, had dedicated her life to education before retiring to focus on her passion for collecting. Her knowledge of American history was not just academic, it was woven into the fabric of her everyday life. Her collection featured rare dolls, some dating back to the late 1800s, each with its own story, a narrative Annabeth cherished and hoped to share with the public through a museum she planned to establish. Her family ties, though not extensive, included her estranged husband, Ronald J. Carlton, from whom she had separated just months after their nuptials. Despite the unraveling of her brief marriage, Annabeth's spirit remained undimmed. Friends and acquaintances from the local antique circle knew her as a woman of integrity and generosity, often contributing to charity auctions with pieces from her collection. In the days leading up to her death, Annabeth was seen at the Kilgore Public Library, researching for an article she intended to submit to Antique Doll Collector magazine. She had also been in contact with the producers of PBS's Antiques Roadshow, expressing her desire to feature her collection in an upcoming segment. Her dreams, however, would remain unrealized. As the nation tuned in to watch the final episode of MASH and local stores advertised the latest Sony Walkman, Annabeth Carlton's life was drawing to a close, unbeknownst to the quiet community of Kilgore. Her story, a blend of academic prowess, cultural contribution, and tragic end, would soon captivate and horrify the residents of this small Texas town. On the morning of August 17, 1983, Kilgore, Texas was waking to another day of sweltering summer heat. The local temperature was forecast to reach the mid-90s, typical for this time of year in the Lone Star State. The town was abuzz with the usual chatter of oil business and the anticipation of the upcoming school year. At the Kilgore News-Herald office, reporters prepared for another day of community stories, unaware that a grim headline was about to unfold. It was 10:45 a.m. when George Hanley, a delivery man for the United States Postal Service, made his way to the Carlton residence on Marlborough Street. He was carrying a parcel containing rare doll accessories sourced from overseas, items that Annabeth Carlton had eagerly awaited to add to her collection. As he approached the door, there was no hint of the horror that lay within. Upon receiving no response to his knocks, Mr. Hanley, who had delivered numerous packages to the Carlton home before and was familiar with Ms. Carlton's routine, found the front door ajar. With a sense of unease, he called out as he stepped inside. The house was silent except for the ticking of an antique grandfather clock. It was then that he discovered Annabeth Carlton, seated in her favorite easy chair, motionless, with 3 gunshot wounds to her heart. The scene was chillingly serene, the collector's lifeless gaze fixed upon the very doll she had so lovingly curated. Mr. Hanley, shaken to his core, stumbled back to his Grumman LLV delivery truck to radio for help. Within minutes, the airwaves crackled with the urgent call, and the Kilgore Police Department was alerted. George Hanley, a veteran postal worker who had once delivered cheerful holiday cards and birthday packages, was now the bearer of tragic news. As the police sirens approached, the community's innocence was pierced by the reality of a brutal and senseless act that had claimed one of their own. The Kilgore Police Department received the dispatch with a jolt. It was 11:02 a.m. when Detectives Yardley Rennick and Lorelei Hales arrived at the Carlton residence, a mere 17 minutes after the initial call from a distressed George Hanley. The detectives, stepping out of their Ford Crown Victoria, were greeted by a scene at odds with the escalating tensions of the Cold War and the national economic discussions that dominated the headlines of the Wall Street Journal. Detective Rennick, a 10-year veteran of the force, and Detective Hales, with her sharp investigative instincts, crossed the threshold into a world frozen in time. The interior of the house was pristine, a stark contrast to the brutal act that had occurred. No signs of forced entry, struggle, or disarray disturbed the collection of antique dolls that watched from their perches with glassy-eyed silence. The detectives, moving methodically through the crime scene, noted the absence of the murder weapon. The cleanliness of the scene suggested premeditation and a personal connection to the victim. They cordoned off the area with yellow police tape, the kind that had become a common sight on television crime dramas, though rarely seen in Kilgore. Rennick and Hales began their meticulous process of evidence collection. They dusted for fingerprints, a technique widely popularized by forensic shows like Quincy, Emmy, which had just concluded its run the previous year. They took Polaroid photographs of the scene, capturing the grim tableau for further analysis. Every fiber, every hair, every yardley was documented and bagged, with the hope that these silent witnesses would yield clues to the perpetrator's identity. The detectives' reactions were a blend of professional detachment and a deep-seated desire for justice. They were well aware that the eyes of Kilgore, and potentially the nation, should the story gain traction beyond local news, were upon them. The pressure to solve the murder of Annabeth Carlton was immense, and the clock was ticking. The focus of the Kilgore Police Department shifted when Alton Hobson, a 16-year-old high school sophomore, came under scrutiny. Known for his rebellious behavior, Alton had been seen loitering near Annabeth Carlton's property on multiple occasions. His small-time criminal record, consisting of vandalism and shoplifting, was already on file with local authorities. Alton, who often fantasized about leaving Kilgore behind for the neon allure of cities like Dallas, found himself in the interrogation room facing seasoned detectives. During questioning, Alton presented a facade of bravado, his leather jacket and disheveled hair reminiscent of the era's rebellious icons, such as Matt Dillon's portrayal of troubled youth in the film The Outsiders, released earlier that year. Despite his tough exterior, detectives noted Alton's hands fidgeting with the hem of his Iron Maiden t-shirt, a popular band whose Peace of Mind tour was making waves across America. Alton's alibi for the morning of August 17th was flimsy. He claimed to have been at the local arcade, a grimy establishment on the corner of Main and Broad Street, playing the latest release of Dragon's Lair, a game which had been drawing crowds since its release in June. However, no witnesses could corroborate his presence during the crucial time frame. The interrogation took a turn when detectives presented Alton with a receipt from a recent transaction at the Kilgore Thriftway, dated August 15th, where he had purchased a pack of Wrigley's gum and a copy of Time magazine, featuring an article on the Cold War tensions heightened by the downing of Korean Airlines Flight 007 by the Soviet Union just days before. The proximity of the store to Annabeth's home raised suspicions further. Despite his insistence on innocence, fear flickered in Alton's eyes when confronted with the gravity of the situation. His claims of never having entered Annabeth's home were met with skepticism, especially when a small, antique doll shoe, not unlike those in Annabeth's collection, was found in the pocket of his faded jeans. Detectives continued to press Alton for the truth, aware that the rebellious teenager was holding back information, whether out of fear or guilt. As the interrogation concluded, the question remained, was Alton Hobson simply a misguided youth, or was he the cold-blooded murderer of Annabeth Carlton? The investigation took a turn as detectives shifted their focus to Sarah May Cleet, a septuagenarian and fervent doll enthusiast whose rivalry with Annabeth Carlton was well documented within the close-knit community of antique collectors. At 72, Sarah May's reputation for her exquisite taste in rare dolls was overshadowed by her contentious relationship with Annabeth, stemming from disputes over the authenticity and ownership of certain pieces in their collections. Living in Longview, a mere 14 miles from Kilgore, Sarah May had been observed at various collectors' fairs and auctions, where her competitive nature often led to bidding wars, most notably with Annabeth. Her ambition to be recognized as the leading doll collector in East Texas was no secret, and with Annabeth's plans to open a public museum, Sarah May's position within the collector's hierarchy was threatened. When questioned by detectives, Sarah May maintained her composure, her voice steady, betraying none of the emotional intensity that characterized her at doll auctions. However, her hands, adorned with Victorian-era rings reminiscent of those worn by the doll she so cherished, quivered almost imperceptibly. Investigators learned that Sarah May had recently placed an advertisement in the Longview News-Journal, seeking to purchase specific items that were known to be part of Annabeth's collection. Moreover, a receipt from the local FedEx outlet showed she had shipped a large package to a renowned doll appraiser in Houston just one day before the murder, raising questions about the contents. Sarah May's home, a veritable shrine to her obsession, was filled with periodicals like Antique Doll Collector, which featured articles on the value of rare dolls, some of which were eerily similar to those in Annabeth's possession. Detectives took note of a particular issue from August 1983, which lay open on Sarah May's coffee table, its pages marked with annotations. Despite the circumstantial evidence piling up, Sarah May's alibi appeared solid. She claimed to have been at a local Longview diner, a claim corroborated by a time-stamped receipt for a breakfast special and the testimony of a waitress who remembered her distinct, old-fashioned attire. The interrogation concluded with detectives uncertain of Sarah May's involvement in the crime. Was her rivalry with Annabeth simply a passion for collecting gone too far, or was it a mask for a more sinister motive? As the sweltering Texas summer pressed on, a breakthrough emerged in the investigation of Annabeth Carlton's murder. On August 24, 1983, a pawnshop in downtown Kilgore contacted the police with a potentially significant lead. The shop owner, an avid follower of the local news, recognized a connection between a firearm he had recently acquired and the Carlton case that was dominating headlines. The gun, a .38 caliber revolver, had been pawned 2 days after the murder. It was accompanied by a pawn ticket signed with a shaky hand, the name on it partially obscured. The shop, cluttered with an assortment of items ranging from second-hand electronics to musical instruments, was a familiar establishment in the community, known for its neon sign flickering above the entrance. Detectives Yardley Rennick and Lorelei Hales wasted no time in examining the firearm. Their initial inspection revealed that the serial number matched a gun legally purchased 6 months prior from a sporting goods store in Longview, Big Jim's Hunter's Haven, a place with a reputation for its extensive collection of hunting and fishing gear. Upon further investigation, the purchase records from Big Jim's revealed the buyer to be none other than Ronald J. Carlton, Annabeth's estranged husband. The detectives recalled that Ronald's background check had uncovered a history of minor fraud charges and a transient lifestyle, frequently moving between motels along the I-20 corridor. The pawnshop surveillance footage, grainy and monochrome, showed a man resembling Ronald, his features obscured beneath the brim of a Stetson hat, a popular brand among Texans. Evoking images of rugged individualism akin to the Marlboro Man featured in advertisements during that era. With this new evidence in hand, the detectives revisited Ronald's alibi. He had claimed to be conducting business in Shreveport, Louisiana, on the day of the murder. However, credit card statements showed no transactions to support his story, nor could any witnesses from the purported business meetings be found. This discovery shifted the focus of the investigation squarely onto Ronald J. Carlton. Was it a coincidence that a gun he had purchased was pawned shortly after Annabeth's death, or was this the missing piece that connected him to the crime? The trajectory of the investigation veered sharply towards Ronald J. Carlton, a 44-year-old man whose nomadic existence and dubious occupation had come under intense scrutiny. Ronald's portrayal as a traveling salesman was a thinly veiled cover for his real line of work, a con artist targeting vulnerable women with his charm and deceit. 6 months before Annabeth Carlton's untimely death, Ronald had married her, only to have their union crumble when she uncovered his history of fraud and deception. The couple's estrangement was public knowledge, with Annabeth's intentions to divorce Ronald and expose his fraudulent activities to the authorities. During his interrogation, Ronald's demeanor fluctuated between suave confidence and barely restrained hostility. Detectives noted his attempts to divert their attention with anecdotes of his travels, mentioning recent popular culture events like the debut of Michael Jackson's Thriller music video on MTV, in an effort to appear relatable and distract from the pressing questions. However, when presented with the evidence of the pawned firearm, Ronald's facade began to crumble. The detectives pressed him on his whereabouts during the time of the murder, to which he insisted on his presence in Shreveport. Yet, the lack of corroborating evidence was glaring. No receipts from the supposed business luncheon at the renowned Shreveport Club, no hotel bookings under his name, and no credit card transactions from August 17th were found. The interrogation room, stark and oppressive, seemed to close in on Ronald as detectives Rennick and Hales presented the pawnshop surveillance footage. The man in the video, despite efforts to conceal his identity with a Stetson hat, a brand favored by Ronald and a symbol of Texan heritage, matched his stature and gait. As the evidence mounted, Ronald's story unraveled. His connection to the pawned gun, his lack of alibi, and his potential motive for murder all pointed towards his guilt. The detectives, with years of experience between them, could sense the shift in Ronald's demeanor as the weight of the circumstantial evidence bore down on him. Was Ronald J. Carlton the mastermind behind Annabeth's murder, driven by greed and desperation to silence her once and for all? As the investigation continued, the circumstantial evidence coalesced into a damning indictment against Ronald J. Carlton. His past marred by a litany of small-time cons and swindles, Ronald emerged as the prime suspect in the murder of his estranged wife, Annabeth Carlton. The detective's suspicions were now backed by a growing body of evidence, including the pawned firearm, a .38 caliber revolver traced back to Ronald's purchase at Big Jim's Hunter's Haven. The methodical collection of evidence by detectives Yardley Rennick and Lorelei Hales painted a grim portrait of premeditated murder. The 3 gunshot wounds to Annabeth's heart were inflicted with chilling precision as she sat in her home, surrounded by her beloved collection of antique dolls. The absence of any sign of forced entry suggested that Annabeth had known her assailant, and the clean nature of the crime scene pointed to a deliberate effort to leave no trace behind. Ronald's motive appeared rooted in the oldest of human vices, greed. Annabeth had threatened to expose his fraudulent activities, a move that would have not only further tarnished his already dubious reputation but also cut off his access to her considerable wealth. In a desperate bid to silence her, Ronald had allegedly turned to murder. The case against Ronald was bolstered by the lack of a solid alibi. His claim of being in Shreveport at the time of the murder crumbled under scrutiny. No tangible evidence placed him at the Shreveport Club, nor at any local establishments. Furthermore, the absence of credit card activity on the day of Annabeth's death contradicted his narrative of conducting business out of town. The investigation unfolded against the backdrop of 1983 America, a time marked by the Cold War and the escalating arms race. Yet, in the quiet town of Kilgore, Texas, the focus was on the unraveling story of a local murder that echoed the dark tales found in the pages of that year's best-selling crime novels. In the end, it was Ronald's own actions and the trail of evidence he left behind that led detectives to identify him as the murderer. His arrest would soon follow, bringing a sense of closure to the community and justice for Annabeth Carlton. On the last day of August in 1983, under the relentless glare of the Texas sun, Kilgore law enforcement officials apprehended Ronald J. Carlton. The arrest took place at a nondescript motel on the outskirts of town, where Ronald had been residing under an alias. The motel, a 2-story building with peeling paint and a neon sign that had seen better days, was a stark contrast to the life of luxury he had briefly enjoyed as Annabeth Carlton's husband. Ronald met his arrest with a stunned silence that bordered on disbelief. The once confident man, who had effortlessly charmed his way into Annabeth's life, was now faced with the reality of his situation. His plan had unraveled, and the consequences of his actions were now inescapable. The arresting officers noted the absence of the bravado he had displayed during the interrogation. There was no more charm, no more aggression, just the quiet resignation of a man caught in the web of his own deceit. News of the arrest spread quickly through Kilgore, a town where gossip traveled fast, often discussed over coffee at local diners like the Huddle House, which had been a community staple since its establishment. The story of Annabeth's murder had been featured in various regional newspapers and had even caught the attention of national media, with brief mentions on cable news networks like CNN, which had been growing in popularity since its launch 3 years prior. Annabeth's family, a small and private group who had known her as a kind and generous spirit, expressed a mixture of relief and profound grief. They had hoped for justice but found little solace in the arrest. It did little to fill the void left by her absence. The community of Kilgore, too, was shaken by the events. For many, it was a stark reminder that such heinous crimes could happen even in their quiet corner of East Texas. Ronald's arrest marked the beginning of the end of this tragic chapter in Kilgore's history. The trial that would follow promised to be a significant event, with the potential to bring closure to Annabeth's loved ones and the community at large. The trial of Ronald J. Carlton for the murder of Annabeth Carlton was a major event in the annals of Gregg County legal history. Held at the Gregg County Courthouse, a stately structure in the heart of Longview, the trial attracted considerable local attention, with residents following the proceedings closely and regional newspapers reporting daily updates. Prosecutor Evan Briggs, a tenacious and sharp-minded attorney with a reputation for his dogged pursuit of justice, led the charge against Ronald. At 38, he had already made a name for himself in legal circles and was known for his meticulous preparation and unwavering commitment to the cases he prosecuted. Opposing her was Jackson Evers, a 52-year-old seasoned defense attorney renowned for his persuasive oratory and shrewd courtroom tactics. Evers had a knack for creating reasonable doubt in the minds of jurors, often referencing popular legal dramas such as The Verdict, which had captured the American public's imagination with its David versus Goliath narrative. The trial proceedings were punctuated by expert testimonies, forensic evidence presentations, and emotionally charged statements from Annabeth's remaining family members. The atmosphere in the courtroom was often tense, as the scales of justice seemed to tip back and forth with each new revelation. Throughout the trial, the jurors, a cross-section of the Kilgore community, listened intently to the arguments presented. They were reminded of their civic duty by the presiding judge, who emphasized the gravity of their responsibility in a manner reminiscent of Judge Harold Haley, a central figure in the highly publicized Hillside Strangler trial in California. In the end, after days of deliberation, the verdict was delivered. Ronald J. Carlton was found guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence was life without the possibility of parole, a decision that brought a somber sense of justice to those gathered in the courtroom. For Annabeth's family and the residents of Kilgore, the verdict was bittersweet. While some felt that justice had been served, for others, the punishment could not compensate for the loss of a beloved figure in their community. The trial's conclusion brought an end to this harrowing episode, but the memory of Annabeth Carlton and the impact of her life and untimely death would endure. In the years following the trial and conviction of Ronald J. Carlton, the town of Kilgore sought to mend the fabric of its community, torn by the high-profile case that had thrust it into the spotlight. The Carlton murder had been a topic of fervent discussion, not only in the local Kilgore News Herald, but also in passing mentions on national platforms like America's Most Wanted, which had begun airing stories of crime and justice across the country. Alton Hobson, the teenage suspect initially questioned, eventually left Texas behind, his name cleared but his life indelibly marked by the investigation. He sought a new beginning far from the whispers and suspicions that had haunted him in Kilgore. His departure was a silent testament to the lasting impact of the case on individual lives. Sarah Mae Cleet, the rival doll collector, continued to immerse herself in her passion, though the shadow of the murder cast a pall over her once joyful pursuit. Her collection grew, but so did the melancholy that accompanied each new acquisition, a reminder of the friend and competitor she had lost. Detectives Yardley Rennick and Lorelei Hales, the seasoned duo who had pieced together the puzzle of Annabeth's murder, went on to solve other cases, their careers forever marked by the complexity and notoriety of the Carlton investigation. Their success in solving the case was a point of professional pride, but the somber nature of their work remained a heavy burden. Annabeth's family, though small and private, found some solace in her enduring legacy. They transformed her Victorian home, once a private sanctuary filled with the silent gaze of antique dolls, into the public museum she had dreamt of establishing. Visitors from across the state came to admire Annabeth's cherished collection, now a tribute to her life and her contributions to the preservation of history. The murder of Annabeth Carlton lingered in the collective memory of Kilgore as a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the dark potential within the human heart. The community, bound by this shared chapter of their history, moved forward with a greater sense of vigilance and a deeper appreciation for the truth that had been so diligently sought by all involved. The murder of Annabeth Carlton remains a somber chapter in the history of Kilgore, Texas. It is a tale that reminds us of the fragility of life and the depths of human depravity. Thank you for joining us on True Crime Case Files. Until next time, stay vigilant and keep seeking the truth. Hey. True Crime Case Solvers, interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. And do you have any thoughts about this case or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Until then, stay safe, True Crime Case Solvers.